together a really cool new Zclassroom. So here on pixologic.com, you go to Learn ZBrush and you go to Video Tutorials. So this is the new Zclassroom. What's great about this is you log in now. So you have a login right here. As you can see, I'm logged in right now. Okay, but what's great is we have capabilities to sort the videos now along here and even search. So say I want to search for something with insert, let's say just insert in it, okay, and I hit enter to find everything that I want to have. So we can say insert edge loops, and then there's the video that we're looking for. So you have the capability to put in specific phrasing that you might find within the ZBrush UI, and it'll pop up the videos that have that. So we've also now put the videos as a beginner section, so any video that we say is a beginner video, you can see will just pop up, and you can scroll through these beginner videos and so forth with intermediate and advanced. So now what's really great is when you guys create a login, and this login is the exact same login that you will use on the Pixologic support site. So however you guys are logging in there, you're using that exact same login here. Okay? So I have some videos that I've already been watching. So I say I can go to my homeroom, and here's all the videos that I've been looking at and watching. Now the great thing about this is you see this little blue bar? This shows how far into the video I've actually been and where I stopped watching. So at any point in time, I can come back here and click on this video and start it from the point where I was at. So this is new to the Zclassroom. So you can see right here, I'm starting at the 3:16-minute mark now because I've already watched the previous time, and now I can just go ahead and hit play and continue on watching this video. Now, in order to save this mark where you're on the video, that's what this little icon right here will be. So you can see save your video progress. So you click on this, and that'll save your video progress. You can share any video that you've been watching here through your Twitter, Facebook, or anything else. If you want to add this video to the library, that's when you log in, you're hitting this little plus symbol right here. Okay? And then what we've done, part of that searching capability now within the Zclassroom is you now have these tags here. So if we want to look for videos that Mr. Joseph Druss has done, you just click now on that name. And any video that Mr. Joseph Druss has done in Zclassroom will pull up, which there's hundreds here. So all the videos, and this is going to keep populating and keep populating and keep populating. So there's an infinity scroller of videos that Druss has done within Zclassroom. So it's a really great way for you guys to search for videos and things like that. So we also have breaking down for courses. So you have getting started, digital sculpting, texturing. If you guys also, when you go to the home page here, there's a learn more button right here. We've also put together a little video here that recaps all the stuff I just covered on how you can search for things and how you can create a login and anything like that. And again, the login's right here, and you're using the exact same login as your support. So I just wanted to point that out because I know we've got a bunch of users that maybe have never used ZBrush in this. So something else I want to point out that we started doing, so we have our YouTube channel here. So we've started doing what's called Ask ZBrush. So if you have a Twitter account, you can send us questions on our Twitter feed using the hashtag AskZBrush. And then we will answer the questions on our site. So we're putting up videos every single week answering the questions that you guys have. So there's currently already 59 videos here on this particular just Ask ZBrush. And you can see they're relatively pretty short. They're mostly like 2, 4, 5 minutes long. None of them get really that long. I think the longest is about this one, about 8 minutes. So it's about just answering a very simple question about something maybe in the UI, not so much of breaking down, hey, how do I sculpt from beginning to end? It's more about just, hey, how do I send a transpose line to my model, for example. So it's really simple, easy for you guys to have. So on the YouTube channel, I also want to highlight, since we're going to be covering ZModeler today, this little fan art of the metal slug that Mr. Joseph Druss did. This is the entire video that's an hour long of him making this piece from beginning to end. and he's using the ZModeler brush to do it. So it's another great resource, a great video after this webinar. You guys want to go watch this, you can definitely do that. Here, I'll put this link in the questions right now so you guys can have it. So I'm just going to tag it to somebody's question itself, and you guys will have it there, okay? So we also have, besides the YouTube channels, I want to highlight that we are currently on ZBrush Central voting for the next ZBrush Awards. So I don't know if any of you joined the summit past year, but we did for the first time ever our first annual ZBrush Awards. So it's all done by you, the community. So all you guys got to do, if you click on any image, so if we go to our main forum here, okay, and we say, hey, this image is really great, I want to vote for this image, you guys would click on this piece, and then you would see a vote button right here. So all you have to do is click a vote button, and then all these votes are coming to us, and then we're going to sort them based upon what categories each one of the highest voted pieces go into. So the award's really great. So a bronze award that myself and Mr. Joseph Druss designed and got made through ZBrush. So we'd love for you guys to go ahead and interact with the community and vote away. So again, voting has started already. We have our YouTube channel. So you can go to YouTube and just put in Pixelogic ZBrush, and it'll pull up this channel right here. And then we have a new Zclassroom with searching capabilities. So I'm going to stop talking myself and start answering the questions there, and I'm going to hand this over to Mr. Druss. While we're doing that, I'm going to launch a poll that if you guys can answer really quick, just 2 questions that Joseph would like to know before he starts getting into the webinar. So, Mr. Druss, are you ready?
I am ready.
You want to take the screen, or you want me to do it? You can just take it.
Yeah, let's take it. All right, you guys see my screen? All right, you guys can hear me? Good, good, good. So this webinar, as Paul mentioned, is our first one, and the premise of stuff we want to show on this is the ZModeler brush. ZModeler has been out for a little while now, but we're still not seeing, quite the usage of it, and so I just wanted to run through, a quick breakdown of the ZModeler brush, how to use it, and show some examples of what can be done with it, and then talk about some of the dynamic subdivision stuff, and go from there. So to start off, I just have a few images. You guys have probably ever seen some of these images as well. And these were all created with the ZModeler brush inside of ZBrush. So I didn't go to any other application other than the KeyShot to render for all these images you're going to see here. So this engine was entirely done with the ZModeler brush. This vehicle here, so just quick concepting, putting together shapes and forms, just being creative and finding structures. The grenade that was shown at the summit a while ago. Knife, I get a lot of questions on this one for using the ZModeler on the building this thing. So we're going to show some of the items I use here with the ZModeler brush to kind of get these things. And some of them are actually features that have been in ZBrush a long time ago, since around, say, 4R4. And they just integrate with, the ZModeler brush and use them to get different effects. A lot of people don't know those. This one is the searchlight. This actually ships with ZBrush. So if you can actually go and look at this model in your version of ZBrush and dissect it and see how I made all the different parts. Most of these are all ZModeler except for the wires that were insert mesh brushes. But once again, you can take ZModeler parts you've made and turn them into insert mesh brushes and apply them to your models. So really interesting and fast way to do creation stuff. This is the metal slug that Paul sent the link out to. And that's the full process of the remake of this model. So I sat down and spent 4 hours start to finish and just time-lapsed it for you all, and then I talk over it for an hour. So if you want to hear my voice for another hour after this webinar, you can grab that video on YouTube. Finally, here we have some example pieces that I'm going to be demoing on some of these today. And so these are just a wide range of stuff that you can just kind of make with this. So you have like jewelry assets, you have props, you have hard surface stuff, soft surface stuff, round, pretty much anything. And you can just make all these things pretty quick. Things like the zip tie here are incredibly simple. And they add that extra little bit of detail that you can put your models and things like that to enhance how things look. And it's all done inside of ZBrush with that ZModeler brush. Finally, this is the main object I'll be focusing on today. So we're going to break down some of the parts on this and show you guys some different ways they can use different features in ZBrush along with the ZModeler brush to get your head wrapped around, the poly modeling structures you're kind of used to already. So this was a drone model I did, and it has a lot of different little parts I just made separately and then put them together. You may see elements of things from like Armored Core and Border Break, which were two games. I used a lot of kind of inspiration from concept from both those things to make some of these designs, and then I put them all together and you ended up with the drone model here. And then this once again was rendered inside of KeyShot, so you can come through and now apply different colors and different things all over the place. So lots of different possibilities and creativity you can do with just ZBrush and then just rendering with KeyShot. So it's a huge advantage. Once again, I didn't go to any other program from this, and I'm able to get this kind of results out of it. And the time frame on this was probably about a day to model everything. The design took me more time to come up with than it actually did to actually model the thing. So we're going to break out some of these parts. We're going to talk about how to model these engines and then some of these frame things through here. So before we do this, I just want to give a brief introduction of what the ZModeler brush is. I know that some of you guys are familiar with this, but for any of the newcomers, you're going to just bear with me while I break down the ZModeler brush and its core elements and kind of show off what it is, and then we'll get into the more grittier details. So to start off, I just have ZBrush loaded up, and with ZBrush loaded up, I'm going to have the Polymesh 3D star selected. So this is just a Polymesh 3D primitive inside of ZBrush here. And I'm going to navigate under the tool palette here to this Initialize panel here. Now, this Initialize panel was created for the Polymesh 3D primitives when 4R7 was released to allow you to generate quick primitives to use with the ZModeler brush. So if I click on QCube, I'm going to get a cube. If I click on QSphere, I'm going to get a sphere. And then if I click on cylinder, I'm going to get a cylinder in different directions. Now, all these primitives here are made for use with the ZModeler brush. So the majority of the time when I start modeling anything, I'm taking a polymesh star or a polymesh object, converting it to a cube, and then I'm modeling it right from there. Now, you can also change the resolution on these through these sliders down here. So if you want to increase the resolution of this cube, so right now it's a 2x2x2, I can change this to something like a 5x2x2, and then when I click QCube, I'm going to get a 5x2x2. So just little things like that you can just quickly make primitives fast inside of ZBrush. Now, after I have this model kind of generate here, this cube, I need to now select the ZModeler brush. So you have two ways you can select the ZModeler brush. The first way is I can navigate over here to this brush palette and click on that, and you're going to see all the brushes that ZBrush has to offer. And in here we can just locate the ZModeler brush right here. Now, the other way you can use this is by using the ZBrush hotkey system for the brushes. And so this system is, I use it all the time, and it basically you hit B on your keyboard to open up your brush menu, and then once you're in here, you just need to hit the next key on your keyboard. That is what the brush starts with. So I'm looking for the ZModeler brush, so it starts with the letter Z. So I'm going to hit Z on my keyboard. And now you're going to see it's going to isolate all the brushes that start with that certain letter. Now after that is isolated, you can then select the third letter, which is the letter that's next to the brush here. So for ZModeler, it would be M. So to select the ZModeler brush, it is B, Z, M, and that will allow you to select the ZModeler brush. If you want to switch back to standard, it's BST, and so you can just come through now, and just using those simple hotkeys, you can jump back and forth between brushes pretty quick. So if you don't want to have brushes cluttering your UI, which you can also do by customization, you can just use those hotkeys to switch through them. So the ZModeler brush is based on a series of actions and targets, and it's a context-sensitive brush. So if you hover over a poly, an edge, or a point on your model, you're going to get a different description of what the action is going to be applied is. So you can see if I hover over an edge, I'm getting an insert. If I hover over a poly, I'm getting a QMesh action. And if I hover over a point, I'm getting a move action. Now, by default, these settings that are stored with the ZModeler brush are pretty powerful. And oftentimes when I'm modeling anything, I may not even go into the extra options that are in the ZModeler brush. I'll just stick with these default ones. Because with these, you can start modeling. So this is single-handed modeling here. You just click and drag to perform a QMesh action on a poly. You can then go to an edge and click and drag, and you'll perform an insert edge action. And then if you cover across a point and click and drag, you're going to perform a move action. So those are your basic default settings for the ZModeler brush. Now, the QMesh action is kind of looks like it's going to be like an extrude function, but it's an extrude function on steroids. So if I start dragging out this QMesh poly here, you're going to notice it's going to perform a snap. And this snap also is going to allow me to tailor an angle along the surface there. So with this, you can come through and drag out geometry quickly and have other geometry next to it snap to it. Now, if you don't want that geometry to snap, you can also remove it. So you just do the opposite process. So if I want to remove this poly, I just can click and drag, and it's going to remove that poly. So really handy stuff there. And as you can see, with just these simple actions of insert edge and just this QMesh stuff, you can start dragging out different shapes all over your model pretty fast. Now, another thing that's really nice with the QMesh brush is it has an option to repeat the process that you just did. So if I drag out this part of the model here, this high, and now I want this part to be drawn out here at the same height, all I have to do is click, and it's going to replay that last action at that same height. So even if I come over here and click, you're going to notice that all those parts are at that same height. So this allows you to perform pretty much any of the ZModeler brush actions and then repeat them to other areas on your model by just simply clicking. So it's really handy process there. Now, another thing that the ZModeler brush has, it has a temporary way of tagging faces to allow you to apply an action across multiple areas. So to do this, if I hover over a poly here and I hold down Alt and then click, it's going to give me this white poly group. Now, this white poly group is going to give me a temporary area that the action is going to be performed to. So if I tag this edge, or tag that face, then tag that face, and then tag that face, and now I perform a QMesh action on this face here, you're going to notice that all those faces that I had tagged with that temporary poly group are also going to have that action applied. So this will allow you to tag, different areas on your mesh all over the place and then apply a QMesh action like so. So another handy thing there. Now, in addition to just these defaults, the ZModeler brush has an abundance of different actions you can apply, and these are also corresponding to each of those contextual areas. So if I hover over a poly and now press spacebar, you're going to get the ZModeler poly action menu. And you can see these are all the different actions I can apply to that poly. If I hover over an edge and press spacebar, you're going to get the ZModeler edge action menu. And if you hover over a point and press spacebar, you're going to get the ZModeler point action menu. So not just having those simple default functions, there's also a robust poly modeling system built into this tool. So now that we have the kind of basis of the ZModeler stuff down, we're going to talk now about some of the dynamic subdivision stuff, but we're first going to just make something really quick. So I'm going to make a simple set of earrings here using some of the ZModeler stuff, and then we're going to talk about the dynamic subdivisions. So here I just have my cube again, and I want to create a set of earrings. So let me just quickly load this in here so you guys can see what this looks like. So we're going to make a quick set of earrings like this. So pretty simple shape, but if you were going to model this, you could think, oh, this is going to take a while. With the ZModeler brush, it's really, really fast. So I'm going to go back to my cube again here, and we're just going to re-get my cube. And we're going to start choosing some stuff. So if we looked at my earrings again, you see I have these open surfaces through here. So we're going to create those really quick inside of ZBrush here. So I'm going to hover over a poly first, and I'm going to press spacebar to open up that poly menu. And I'm going to locate the inset action. Now with this inset action and a target set single poly, if I come across a poly on my model and simply click and drag, it's going to inset that face. So you can see I can come through and you can start insetting all these polys on the surface like so. Now, with just insetting that face, you also have some other modifiers down here with this action. So we can do center and border, which is what we just did. We can do border only, which is just going to generate the border only around that inset. And we also have the option to do center only, which is only going to give us that center polygon. Now, in addition to this, you also have the option to inset each poly and inset region. So right now, those cubes or the earrings I had, they had this kind of whole surface popped out. So we had just a void in our shape here. So I'm going to hover over a poly again. I'm going to change my target to flat island, which is now going to look at this entire flat surface here. And then I'm going to change my modifier back to center and border and change it to inset region. So now when I come across the surface here and click and drag, it's going to inset the region like so. So now you can see that that entire inset happened across that flat island there. If I change this to something else, it would change across that target. We're going to keep it at flat island right now. Now those rings we had too for the earrings, it also had that hole punched out. So if I change this to border only and keep that as inset region and drag it out, I'm now going to get this effect. So that's given me closer to what we were looking like with those cube earrings. Now since I applied this action once to that one flat island, I can now simply repeat this around the rest of the areas of cubes by simply clicking. So I can click here, click here, click here, click here, and click here. And you're going to notice that that inset, since this cube was a perfect cube, is going to be applied exactly all the way around the model. Now, a lot of stuff I do with the ZModeler brush involves a lot of flat face building and then applying different depth or values to that. So right now, this cube is pretty much hollow. It's a single-sided cube, but I want to add thickness to the entire surface. So I'll hover over a poly again, and this time I'm going to choose the Q mesh action, and I'm going to change my targets to all polygons. Now, with the Q mesh action and all polygons selected, the ZModeler brush is going to look at this entire model, and when I apply this Q mesh action, it's now going to give thickness to that entire surface. So you can see now that cube has now gone from that flat surface, and now it has an entire surface around it. So now that we have this shape here, we can now start talking about dynamic subdivision. So normally when you have a mesh created inside a ZBrush, you generate something like this, or you bring a mesh in, and then you start dividing it. So you come over to the Geometry tab, and you click Divide, and you start dividing your model up. Now when you're using the ZModeler brush, you're going to notice right now I have a lot of geometry on this model. So I'm up to 9,000 points here on this mesh. So if I come in and try to Z-model this now, you're going to notice how small that area of change is going to be. You can see these tiny little red squares here that consist of that polygon size. Well, with the addition of the ZModeler brush, this ability to do dynamic subdivision has been added. And this is going to allow you to preview what that subdivision is going to look like on your model without actually subdividing it. So I come over here and activate this, and then I can change the slider down here, and this is going to determine how many subdivisions it's going to generate in this preview mode on my model. So now you can see with dynamic on, it's still looking like it did when I did the traditional subdividing of the mesh. But now, if I come across a poly here, you're going to see I'm still operating on that low resolution model. So if I start extruding this out, say going back to QMesh with a single poly, you can see I'm still activating on that lower resolution model. I'm not activating on the subdivided version. So this can sometimes be confusing as well if you accidentally click dynamic and you want to start sculpting on the surface. Right now, if you went to, say, the clay brush here and you tried to sculpt on this, you'd notice you wouldn't get a change. And this is because you're actually clay sculpting on this version of the mesh, not the dynamic one. So just make sure if you want to sculpt on a model that you're not in dynamic mode, or you may not see the changes you want. Now you can turn any of these meshes into real geometry at any time by simply coming over here and clicking this apply button. And this is going to take your model and it's going to apply the subdivisions back onto it. So now I have a model with subdivisions, and now if I wanted to use that clay brush, I can do it on the surface of the mesh there. So interesting stuff there. So now that I have this kind of shape sorted out, now I can come through and make my other pairs of earrings here. And another thing that if you guys aren't useful or familiar or comfortable with is the transpose line. And the transpose line is very powerful, and once you start using this more and more, you're going to just get accustomed to it, and it's going to be a huge thing in your ZBrush arsenal, and you're going to end up using it all the time. So one awesome thing the transpose line has, it has the ability to clone stuff really quick. And so if you're in move transpose mode, you hold Control and Shift and then click this inner circle here in the middle circle and move, it's going to clone that mesh. So I can just duplicate that model there, and then I can transpose again. So now I have two of my links there for my earring, and then I can do the same thing again and get my third link and grow it up. And now I have my earrings quickly generated here. Now these can just be sent right out to get 3D printed now, and as long as you align them correctly on your bed, you can end up printing these out and wear them on your ears. So interesting stuff, and as you can see, if I wasn't talking, it would have took like 2 minutes. But really cool stuff there with that. Now with the dynamic subdivision, another thing that plays along really well with this is creasing. So I'm just going to select this polymesh a cylinder 3D object here, and I'm going to come to the Initialize tab, and I'm going to change the divisions on this to say 8, and then turn down the vertical divides, and I'm going to turn that into a polymesh 3D. Now I'm going to go to Geometry again, and I'm just going to activate dynamic subdivision on this mesh. Now, right now, this model doesn't have any really supporting edge loops. So it's a 8-sided cylinder, and it doesn't have any cross sections going through it. So I turn dynamic subdivision on. I'm going to end up with something like this. And so I can smooth it up and down, and you're going to get this kind of smooth shape, but it's not going to look like a cylinder much anymore. So along with dynamic subdivision, another thing that plays a huge part with the ZModeler brush and dynamic subdivision is creasing. So inside the ZModeler brush, we go back there, and if I hover over an edge and I press spacebar, there's an option for crease. And then here you have a bunch of targets, and one of these targets is edge loop complete. So if I come across my cylinder here and I use this edge loop complete action on this edge, it's going to give me a crease all around that edge there. Now, when you get a crease applied to your model, you're going to notice you're going to get this dotted line effect. And this is going to be applied to wherever edges that are creased on your model. Now, when you have creasing on your model, ZBrush is going to disable the smoothing algorithm. That's going to affect that area when the model is subdivided. So if I come over here and now activate dynamic subdivision, you're going to notice that the top of the cylinder there has that nice sharp edge, and then the bottom still doesn't have that sharp edge on it. So I can come down and now crease that bottom edge as well and turn back on my dynamic, and I'm going to end up with a smooth cylinder like so. So using this creasing, you can tailor the way your shapes look, and especially any geometry that you've created using the ZModeler brush. So let's say I want to bevel this top part of this cylinder here. So I'm just going to hit Shift-D to get out of dynamic, and I'm going to hover off this edge again, and I'm going to go to the Edge Model Action menu by pressing spacebar. And now I'm going to select Bevel again and make sure my target is Edge Loop Complete. And I'm just going to bevel this edge loop. So now I've created a bevel there. And then I'm going to go back in, and I'm going to crease these two edge loops like so. And now I'm going to activate Dynamic again, and now I have a cylinder like this. So harsh edge to soft edge. Now, another good example of this kind of dynamic subdivision, let's just make another quick shape here. Get another Q cube. And for this time, I'm going to delete the edge in the center here. So I have the Insert Edge Loop selected, which allows me to insert a loop. And I'm going to hold Alt, and this has an alternate functionality. And if you hold Alt and click on an edge, it will delete the loop. So I'm just going to come through and delete these loops like so. And then I'm going to use the poly action of move and move this back, so just making this a little bit thinner. And then I'm going to select the spin option and do all polygons, and then change my alignment to 15 degrees and just rotate this to 15 degrees so it's like this now. And I'm going to make a little quick kite shape here. So I'm going to go to my move option here on my point, and right now the target of this is set to brush radius. So this is another great thing about all these different actions. You can tailor, different things you want to do. So by default, this move points is going to allow me just to move a single point. So I can come through and start moving things like this. But when I move this point, I want this point behind it to move as well. So if I hover over that point again, and I press spacebar to go into this point action menu, there's a target down here called infinite depth. Now if you choose infinite depth, it's going to look at this point, and depending on what the depth is, what's behind it, it's going to move that point as well. So if I want to make this kind of a kite shape, I can come and now select this point and move it, and you're going to notice it's going to move that point on the back side as well. So this allows you to come through and kind of frame your model in orthographic views and move points all along that same orthographical line. So this, I can move this point and this point at the same time. So this is another really handy feature when using the ZModeler brush to kind of tailor or shape structures on your models in different ways. So now that I have this kite shape, I'm just going to go ahead and I'm going to do this inset region again. Then we're going to do the flat island, center and border, and inset each poly. And I'm just going to inset this part here. And I'm going to flip around and then just apply it to the back as well. And now that I have my geometry matching on the front and back, I can come through with the QMesh single poly action again and punch a hole right through that model. And we end up with this shape. So a little kind of kite shape here. Now if I go back to my geometry tab and activate dynamic subdivision again. Now with this active, it's doing what you kind of expect to do. So it's taking all the model geometry there and it's smoothing it out. So you end up getting this kind of ring shape. Now I could come in with the ZModeler brush here and crease these edges. I come through and crease these guys here. Oop. And then apply it again, and you're going to see now I have a hard edge to a soft edge, so you can get varying shapes like this. Now this is all good if you want to make stuff like this, but with the other options that are in dynamic subdivision, there's a slider over here called QGrid. And what QGrid is going to do, it's going to generate bumping edge geometry across your model based on every single visible edge on your mesh. So right now, if I come back to my model, you're going to see these are pretty much all the visible edges I have. So if I activate dynamic symmetry again, and now I activate QGrid, it's going to now start generating this effect of pretty much giving me this nice soft edge around my entire model here. So now this is still the lower res version that I had here with dynamic off, but now it's giving the effect of this. So I can still come through and model like normal, but now it's going to give me all this kind of nice soft beveling across everything. Now this QGrid option has a bunch of different features you can change with it too. So right now it's just set to bevel. I can change it to chamfer. I can do chamfer and bevel. And you also have this coverage option here. Now this coverage option is pretty amazing because it's going to take simple shapes like you're seeing here and it's going to totally change them. So as I change this coverage option here, you're going to see it's going to totally distort that mesh. And now I'm getting this really complex shape generated that didn't take any time at all. So I just now created some sort of crazy pendant, right? So this can go as another set of earrings or maybe just as another pendant. It could be some sort of attachment. It could be anything. And all it was done was created from this simple shape and with this QGrid option. So dynamic subdivision with QGrid and without QGrid allows a lot of potential between these two things. Now the QGrid option works best with hard surface edges, so things that do not have round areas in them. And this is because the QGrid option is looking at every single edge that is on your model. So let's go back to my cylinder here that we just did a few minutes ago. And now let's change or turn QGrid onto this. So this model has a lot of areas we want to keep round, right? But if we look at this model, you can see all these edges consist, right? So when we activate this QGrid here, it's going to look at all those edges. And so this is now going to give you this effect. Now you could still change the coverage and get a different shape or result out of this. But in general, this is probably not what you're going to want as a cylinder. So you need to kind of manage at what areas on your model you may want to use QGrid and what areas on your model you may want to just use dynamic subdivision. So an example of this, here I have this mech setup right here. Now this mech is broken into different colors based on what processes were used across the geometry here. So the green areas through here are using the QGrid, so dynamic subdivision with QGrid. The tan areas are just using dynamic subdivision, and these brown areas here are both dynamic subdivision and QGrid geometry that was converted to Dynamesh. So you can see the varying degrees of stuff you can put together with each of these individual options to generate shapes and forms. So let's first look at this shape right here. I'm just going to isolate this guy. Now this shape was made specifically for using the QGrid surface. So if I go to my dynamic and turn it off, you can see it's pretty much a mess of polygons, right? Like if you were to polymodel this and you wanted to actually make this nice and even, you'd probably spend a lot of time, making sure all your edges lined up and everything else. But it's not needed to get the shape I wanted inside of ZBrush here. So I made this shape quickly with the ZModeler brush, just cut out holes, puts things through it, and then I just activated dynamic and turned on QGrid and I get this shape. Now if I turn off QGrid, this is what I'm going to end up with. So you can tailor which shapes you have to use QGrid and which shapes you want to use without QGrid. And it's going to allow you to speed up your workflows and your processes. So without QGrid, I could come in and crease all these individual edges and bring this back to looking like it did without QGrid, but it's going to take some time. So if I just come over and activate QGrid, I've just saved myself a whole bunch of time, just like that. Now, once again, the areas in tan were used without QGrid, and so if I solo that, you can see if I turn QGrid on now, you're probably not going to want them on these areas, because see, now you're going to see every single one of those edges in that surface there. But without QGrid, you're going to get this nice, smooth surface. So just tailoring those different areas there. Now back to the brown areas here, which are the Dynamesh objects. You can always take anything you create with the ZModeler brush and anything you have with the dynamic stuff and turn it into real geometry and then also just Dynamesh it. So if I want to apply some logos or some damage to this part up here, I can solo that guy quick. I can come over here and click apply, and this is now going to turn that into a real mesh. Now since the topology on this surface was not very good through here, if I come through and sculpt on this, it's not going to look very good. Now I could use ZRemesher and ZRemesh this thing, and I can also just use Dynamesh. So for this model, I'm just going to come through here, and I'm just going to Dynamesh the model quick. So say do 256, turn off project. And now I have a Dynamesh version of the model here. And now I can come through and now take my clay buildup brush and start damaging these up like I want. Maybe add, some different parts in there. So you're not really limited to the ZModeler brush geometry as your final state or as your final mesh. You can always convert to a Dynamesh. You can always sculpt on it. You can always add details. You can always keep going and going and going. So I use the ZModeler brush and the geometry assets to generate my base meshes, my base forms, to sculpt things out on it, to figure out shapes and designs, and then convert them to Dynamesh objects, convert them to ZRemesh them, to regenerate topology, and then subdivide them to get the end results I'm looking for. So that is my main process and principles around the ZModeler brush. So now on to the drone. So here is the final version of the drone here. And this is all ZModeler. So every single bit of this model here was done with the ZModeler brush. And another nice thing, if you're using dynamic subdivision, so if you're using any of the dynamic stuff here, you're not really throwing massive amount of polygons into your scene. So right now, if I save this file out, I think the global file for this drone right here is not even 9 megs, right? So this file right here, looking like this, is 9 megs in size, right? It's because each of these individual parts is just previewing these subdivisions. They're not actually generating the subdivisions. So you don't have all that vertex data stored in the file when you save it. So if you can get away with using dynamic subdivision on your meshes, you're going to have these really lightweight files, and they're still going to look amazing. Now, if you want to get them out to, bake or things like that, you will have to transform them into real geometry. But at this stage, you can keep your scene sizes down. You're not dealing with 4 gig files. You're dealing with, 9 megs for this model here. So also when I'm modeling stuff, I do a lot of part stuff. So if you don't feel like you need to make everything with one single ZModeler subtool, like split it off, do duplicates, do things like that. And so each of these individual parts here, you can see, are all based around different primitives, and they're all applied together. So I will break things off and move them over and put them in different places, and then just keep modeling like that. So you can see all the different assets that this drone is made of. Now we're going to focus on some of these parts on this drone. So we're going to first start with this little engine piece here, and we're just going to load up a isolated version of this so I can kind of talk through some of this. So here we have the drone engine here. Now this is inspired by a border break grenade, I think is what it was. So it's not my full original design. It's been massacred some, but in general it was from theirs. But a good example of, a quick model you can make with the ZModeler brush. Now, if I look at the model here, you can see I have it broken up into polygroups based on the separate parts that this consists of right now. So all these different polygrouped areas are different parts on the model. So I can come through and isolate these. And you can work on them like this, where they're all one single mesh, or you can work them on in separate meshes. So I'm going to go through now and just model this out really quick so you guys can kind of see the process that I do to get this created. And it's pretty simple. So I start a lot of stuff out with primitives. So we're going to just first come over here to this cylinder 3D object and just load that in like so. And I'm just going to make this a polymesh 3D. So here I have it as a polymesh. And now I'm going to go to the Geometry tab here. I'm going to go to this Edge Loop tab, and I'm going to click this Delete Loops button. Now you could also do this through the Initialize menu before you made it a polymesh 3D. But if you have, loops on your model and you want to get rid of them, you click this Delete Edge Loops, and any edge loops that it thinks are non-functional or non-shape, not applying to the shape of your form, it's going to remove them. So on cylinder objects like this, it'll just strip them right out, which is really nice. Now I need to make sure I have my other stuff up here. So for this, the simple shape of the motor is basically cylindrical, right? So we're not looking at anything too crazy, cylindricals. So cylindrical objects inside of ZBrush are very easy to manage and very easy to create. So we have things like radial symmetry, which are huge. We also have things like all the ZModeler stuff for the loops and edges, and it just plays really well with creations on stuff like this. So I'm going to select the ZModeler brush, and I'm going to start manipulating this some. So first I'm going to shrink this down a little bit. And another thing I end up using a lot is transpose back again, and I use the transpose move function to scale stuff quite a bit. So for transpose, basically just draw it out on your model. If you hold down shift, it's going to lock it to an axis. So if I draw it outside, it's going to lock like that. And you have this white circle here. Now this white circle, we actually have a think we have an Ask ZBrush video on this. If you click this white circle, it's going to center that transpose line to the center of your model. So any areas you have unmasked or just visible, it's going to center to that area. So this has now snapped the transpose line directly in the center of the model. Now I can come through and select one of these outer edges here, and it's going to snap it in that vertical position. Now I can go to Move and click and drag this inner circle here and scale my shape down like so. And it's going to scale it correctly. It's not going to be skewed. It's going to be right in the middle of the object. So I use a lot of move transpose like that when modeling objects. But now from here on out, it's going to be pretty much all ZModeler stuff. So insert edge loops is a big thing I use all the time. So this one I come through and start inserting some edge loops on this mesh here. And mirror and weld is another great one. This allows you to just use part of your model. So I'm going to go underneath the geometry panel here, and down here under Modify Topology, I have a mirror and weld. And I know that this should be in the Y direction here. So if I set that to Y and now mirror and weld, you can see it's going to give me my middle line of my object here, where the weld happened, and my top and my bottom are going to be the same. So since this engine here is pretty much the same top to bottom, we're just going to keep it like that for now. Now I have this edge loop created, and I need to make that kind of tapered edge on it. If you have an edge loop generated already, you can remove it, but you can also slide these at this point too. So you can select the slide, edge loop complete, and now you can change how these edge loops are. So if I can come through and slide them in and out like so. And so to create this top bevel, I'll come through and just set my start and my end, and then I'll remove this edge through here. So I'm going to go grab that insert, hold Alt, and then just remove it. And now I have that kind of tapered top there. And I can always come over here and click mirror and weld to get it to go on the bottom. I'm going to add some more insert edge loops in here to get that kind of frame of the grenade there, or the engine, and get on the bottom. And now I'm going to carve out this inner surface. So this is going to be done through polygrouping. So I'll hover over an edge again, hold spacebar, choose polygroup this time. Its target is set to poly loop. And I can click, and that's going to give me a new polygroup for that entire poly loop. If I tap Alt when I do this, I'm going to get a different color for that polygroup. So I can come through and now apply that polygroup into those two areas there. And another thing with the ZModeler brush, polygrouping is a big thing because you can set your targets to work only on polygroups. So over here we have all these options for polygroups, islands, inner border, all pretty much a lot of targets, and you can set polygroups on your model and then have those different ZModeler actions only apply to those areas. So since I set this area as a different polygroup, I can now go to polygroup all and QMesh, and now simply QMesh this in, and I'm now only going to affect that area through there. So now I continue coming through and adding some more stuff on this. So I'm going to go to insert single edge loop again, insert this on this top here. I'm going to start making a inner surface here. Use a lot of the Alt temporary polygroup option too. So I like doing this circular process. It just, I don't know, I like doing it. So hold Alt and then rotate around. You get this kind of effect. And now I come in and QMesh that poly, and it's only going to affect that tagged area for all those surfaces. And now I get something like that. Then I come in and I can bevel these guys. So just coming through and quickly beveling to get a nice beveled surface there. And I'm going to go and bevel this and bevel this one as well. Now right now I haven't applied any creasing to the surface here, so I've basically just been beveling and just establishing my shape. Now once I turn the dynamic subdivision on, I'm going to go back in and apply some creasing in different areas, and it's going to make those edges stronger or softer where I want them. And then we're going to insert another polygon here, and we're actually going to bring this up a little bit, so targeting that, QMeshing that up, tagging a insert again on this one. I'm going to get that inner kind of surface of the engine there. This is stuff that was hidden by the blades on the actual model. So it was like, I probably didn't need to have to do that, but it gives some fun stuff. So stuff like that. Now another option, if you ever want to just move a single point and you like using transpose, you can hover over a point and there's an option for transpose in here in the ZModeler brush. And what this is going to allow you to do is allow you to transpose a single point on your mesh. So if I come and click on this now, you can see it's going to mask everything out except for that point that I selected. And now this transpose line is automatically positioned in that right area. So now I can simply just click and drag in, and it's going to just move that point there. So another nice way to kind of tailor your shapes on your mesh there. Now, speaking of like beveling and stuff too, another thing I do a lot of, and you'll see me do this in a minute as well, is I'm just going to make an edge loop at the bottom there. is say I want this loop here to kind of bubble out. So if you hover over this edge here and you go to multiple edge loops, there's an option for interactive elevation. And what this is going to allow you to do is you can kind of generate beveled areas on your mesh as needed as well. So if I come across this area here and I just go across this multiple edge loop and I simply click and drag, if I go left and right, it's going to increase the elevation. And if I go up and down, it's going to increase the tessellation. So as you can see, I can now do things like that, and now I have a rounded shape on that surface there. So if I wanted to bevel these out as well, I could come through and do this and generate round surfaces on different areas. So another way you can create beveling on your models. This option also works really well for generating center points. So if I want to know the exact center of this edge loop here and this edge and generate an edge loop in the middle, I can make sure I still have that multiple edge loop selected, turn off the interactive elevation, and now click, and if you just drag slowly, you can see it's going to increase, but if you just leave it at 1, that edge loop is going to be directly in the middle there all the way through that mesh. So another thing that's big, if you ever want to put, single areas on your model, which we're going to do here in a second, where you want that edge to go precisely. So I'm just going to come through and add some more edge loops to my model here like so, and then we're going to do a mirror and weld so it's on both sides. And next thing I want to do is we're going to do some creasing on this because I want to turn dynamic subdivision on. So I'm going to go to dynamic subdivision, I'm going to turn it on, and by default you're going to get this. So it's still giving me a subdivided result of my model, but those edges that I kind of cut in and spaced out, they're not as harsh as I want them to be. So I could manually go in and start creasing all these edges using the crease option here and say edge loop complete, and then come in and crease all these. But also underneath the geometry tab there is a crease section through here, and in here you have a bunch of ways you can automatically increase your entire model. So what I like doing is I'll come through and set this crease tolerance to say 45, and then I'll click crease. And this is going to look at all angles that are around 45, and it's going to apply a crease to those areas. So now if I turn my dynamic back on, you're going to see it's creased a lot of those areas that had that 45 degree. Now some of these are still a little bit too soft, so you can even come through and say crease with polygroups. So if I have all these polygroups set up nice like this, I can crease with the polygroups, or the Paul Gabery polygroup there. And now you can see that now all those areas of polygon or polygroup breakup have now had creasing applied to the edges. So now my model is looking more of what I want it to look like. And now I can still come in and say tailor those creasings out as well, so I can uncrease certain areas like so, and bring back in soft areas if I want soft areas, and hard areas if I want hard areas. So that's the basic shell there for that engine turbine. Now another thing with this, if we go back to my motor here, you can see I have these individual parts. So I have this panel here. This one I actually just built in this time, but this could have been a separate part. And I have this whole area here. So how do I go by creating these? So we're going to go back to my cylinder primitive here. And to do this, we just need to find the area geometry we want this to create, and we're going to rip that part of the geometry off and make it a duplicate or a clone. So I'm going to come through here again and apply a new polygroup to this area. I'm going to just hit Alt to get a different color so I can see it a little bit better. And I'm going to hover over this poly and make sure I have that Q mesh action selected, and I'm going to do polygroup island on this time. And I'm simply just going to click and drag this out. Now when you click and drag out normally with this Q mesh action, you're going to notice it's going to perform that weld action, which is usually what you want. But there are a few options that are additions to the Q mesh action you can apply. While you're doing this, if you hold Control, it's going to separate that part off as a new piece of geometry, or a new geometry island. And if you hold Shift, it's going to move it. So using these two options, you can come through and move or detach / clone different parts of your model. So for this inner ring, I want to detach it. So I'm going to come through and just hold Control, which is going to detach that surface. And I'm going to float it right about there. And now this is a new geometry island. So if I hold Control and Shift and click, you can see this is what I'm left with, right? Now I can split this off into its own part. So I'm going to go here to the geometry menu, go to Split, and do Split Hidden. And now I have that center cylindrical there as its own part. And then below it is the original one, like so. So now I have a new subtool created with this model here. Now if you ever want to delete stuff on your model too, there's also a delete hidden option. And so if you have areas of your mesh that are hidden and you want to delete everything, you can do delete hidden underneath geometry. I use that, another button I use all the time. So now they have this single area geometry. I now just want to come through and give this thickness. So I'm going to use that Q mesh action again with all polygons and just thicken that up. So now I have that ring. And if I go back to my shell, you can see it's a little bit thick. I don't really want it that thick. So now I'm going to isolate that again, and we're going to move some of these things through here. So I'm going to polygroup these areas that were just created through here. So back to the ZModeler brush, polygroup that poly loop. I'm hitting the edge action. Let's change that to move. And we're going to polygroup this loop right here. It lets me. I got masking on. We'll do these. And I'm going to polygroup these inner ones. So now I have this broken into outer polygroups, the border polygroup, and the inner polygroup. And now with this, I can use that Q mesh action again, and I can manipulate this inner polygroup by itself. So if I have the Q mesh action selected for polygroup island, or polygroup all, and now I can drag that out, it's going to give me that center area there, and I can hold shift and I can move that in. And I can do the same on the other side and move it in. And now I'm deforming the surface there, right? So now I can control how much inner and outer that is. So it's using the Q mesh action with shift, and it's allowing me to get that area exactly where I want it to be. So something like that, right? So now next I had that other section that was very similar to this section. So I'm just going to duplicate this guy here, and we're going to go to solo again. And this was that area that kind of had like the rubber ribbing or something you want to call it, like this stuff here. And we're just going to model that quick. And so for this, I'm just going to delete some stuff, right? So I'm going to come over and I'm going to use the select rectangle here and turn off dynamic. And I'm just going to delete this part of the mesh here. And I'm going to hold down Alt while holding Control and Shift, and then just delete that. So I'm going to end up with this. Now I'm going to use that delete hidden again. And now as you'll notice, I have holes on my mesh here. So I'm going to hover over an edge again, and this time I'm going to use Bridge, Edges. And this is going to allow me to select one edge and then select a second edge, and it's going to bridge those two edges. So I can clean up this geometry. Just come through and click these guys here, and quick saving. And we'll do the other side just so you guys get the bridge edge action. If I had symmetry turned on, this would already be done. And Paul, how am I doing on time? If Paul is still there. Paul may be asleep. So now I have those edges connected there. Now, next thing I want to do with those ribbing section through here is I had these multiple parts pulled out. So I just want to split these a little bit more. So I'm going to insert a single edge loop and delete that middle one out of there on both sides. And we're going to see if I got my symmetry correct here. And I'm going to do a multi-edge loops this time, and I'm going to keep it as, well, we'll keep the same poly group. And I'm going to insert these, and I'm just going to insert a few of these guys. So I want to make that kind of ribbed kind of effect on the surface there. And I'm going to go to the creasing menu here and uncrease everything. So now I have my geometry set like this. So I have even spacing of those polygons all the way through. Now I'm going to come through and assign the same poly group to each of these areas to create this kind of ribbed effect. So I have polygrouping all the way like so. And now I'm going to Q mesh polygroup all again and pull those out. And you can see now I have that ribbing effect. Then I come through and do that crease again, and then go back to dynamic subdivision and turn it on. These edges are a little bit too harsh, so I'm going to go back in and tailor those edges with the creasing there. I'm on crease.
You have 30 minutes.
30 minutes?
You have 30 minutes.
Okay, so we're going to have to speed this up a bit. So there you go. So you got that webbing there. And so you can come through and tailor the creasings and get things like that. Now, the engine had a hole here as well. So for this, I'm going to use the split action on a point. And I'm going to come through and split this. Now, I usually split things twice. So I'll split it once, and then split it again, and I'll hold Alt on that second split to change the polygroup on that area. Now, I do this second split a lot because you're going to be able to do some interesting things with this. So the first thing I'm going to do is just push out this. So I'm going to push this inward, so using that Q mesh action. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to grab this polygroup here, do polygroup all, pull that out. And now you'll notice that this part right now kind of has this curve to it. So another thing with the ZModeler brush is you may come across areas you want to align or establish, flat areas with. And this is where another feature that's inside of ZBrush comes into play that's been there for a while, and now it just works really well with the ZModeler brush. This is the clip brush. So to select the clip brush, you're going to hit B on my keyboard and hit C, and then you have the clip curve brush right here. So I'm going to hit C again. Now the clip curve brush, when you use it, it's going to take any geometry you have and it's going to mush it to the clip line. So you can get this line like so, and anything that's on that gradient side is going to get mushed to that side. So if I want to align all these vertices here in a row, I can move it like so and click it, and now it's going to align all those vertices like that. So this is incredible for using the ZModeler brush. If you ever need to align anything, instead of me going in and trying to manually move these, I can just come through, grab that clip brush, find the area I want, clip it, and it's going to now give me that flat surface. So really interesting way to use other tools inside of ZBrush along with the ZModeler brush. Now the other thing with using this double ring effect is this one is a little bit too far out, but I can also move this back in a little with, say, transpose, and just shrink them back in, is since I had that extra edge loop through there, I can now do that same insert multi-loops with that interactive elevation, and now I can get a soft bevel on that lip there. So another interesting way you can come through and tailor different surfaces for cylindrical areas. Now I'm going to have to speed through some of this, so because I have a whole other section I want to show still. So now we talked earlier about radial symmetry and things like that. So radial symmetry also works with the ZModeler brush. So here I just have the ZModeler brush selected, and I've activated radial symmetry in the y-axis, and I have a radial symmetry of 8. So I can come across these areas on the mesh here, and we're actually gonna delete this edge loop quick. I want it the other way, and we're gonna actually turn off symmetry quick because I forgot to add some lines here. I'm gonna add 2 bounding lines here, and now I turn back on my radial symmetry. And I'm gonna go to the QMesh, the ZModeler poly action again. I'm gonna select that inset again, single poly, center and border, and now with the radial symmetry, I'm gonna come through and activate that across that surface there. So now I've applied this inset action across that whole radial area. Now I can apply a creasing to this too, the same way. So I'm doing a single poly, outer targets. Now all those are creased, and then I can QMesh this again with that single poly to get that hole generated. And now when I turn on my dynamic subdivision, you're getting something like that, right? So now I have all those holes generated across that area. Now, in addition to the dynamic subdivision, you can also just use any insert mesh brushes as well, so to add different stuff to your models. So one that I like to use a lot is this IMM model kit brush that I made for 4R7. And in here you have a library of different parts. Now all these parts in here are set up already to use creasing and dynamic subdivision. So if I say grab this one here with that radial symmetry selected, and since we're using dynamic and not traditional subdivisions, I can come through and now drag this out, and now I have some sort of LED lights now on my model as well. So that took 2 seconds, and now I have a little more detail on that mesh. Now another shape that's really fun to make that I get asked a lot about. Let me turn off this radial symmetry here. Is these kind of oval shapes. So I have the ZModeler brush selected again, and I'm going to insert some edge loops, one here and one here. And on this point here and this point here, I'm going to split these guys. And I'm just going to split them once. Now when we do this replay action, you're going to notice it's going to replay at the same size. So if I split this point at that size and then split point at that size, both of those things are the same size. So now I want to make this oval kind of shape that we see in this mesh right here, right? So to do that, now that I have this geometry developed, I just need to use polymodeling stuff and just manipulate this geometry a little bit better. So to do this, the main one I use is this collapse and collapse edge. And I can come through now on these edges, and if you click one way, it's going to collapse one way, and if you drag the other way, it's going to drag the other way. And I can come through, and I can just simply come through and collapse these edges now. And this is going to now generate an effect like this. So now I have this oval shape. So now I can come through and QMesh this like so, and then drag that in, and there's my starting oval there. I can now delete these extra edges here that I don't need anymore because they're going to cause me looping issues. So I can get those out. I can remove the creasing out of this as well. So holding Alt and clicking. And then I can crease these with edge loop complete. And so now I have that oval shape there. Now you probably want to bump this a little bit as well, so I'm going to add another edge loop here and another edge loop here, and now I have that kind of area. And I'm actually going to do a crease on flat island with outer targets on the bottom here, and there we go. So now I have that kind of shape. Now with this, I want to do like still looking a little bit too flat, so I'm going to use that insert edge loops, multi-edge loops again. So multiple edge loops there, use that interactive elevation, and I'm going to apply this to the surface like so, and expand it up. And now I've got this kind of nice tapered bevel effect there. So that one is one I use all the time, just taking all these things and making things, and then it's just all poly modeling is all it is. So it's just understanding where the loops are, and then using things like collapse and stuff to generate that shape. Now, say I have something like this, right? Now this is a really good one. This is the other part. So now I want to kind of get this around this other model there. Now I could have turned on radial symmetry and done this all the way around. I could have made it so, you know, mirror and welded would have welded all the way around, but we're going to go even a step further. So I'm going to duplicate this tool, and I'm first just going to isolate this section right here. So I'm going to hold Control and Shift and just select this polygroup here, and then I'm just going to isolate that by itself. And then I'm going to hold Control, Shift, and X, and I'm going to start growing this. So if you have visibility or anything hidden on your model, Control, Shift, and X will start growing the visibility on the surface there. So once again, I'll isolate that polygroup, isolate this one, Control, Shift, X. You can see I have that one edge, next edge, and then the top edge. So now I have a shape like this. And this is what I want right now with this model. So I duplicated this, so I have my other one still up there. And I'm going to take this now, and I'm just going to simply delete this. Delete everything else except for this part. So I'm going to delete hidden and remove it from our model. And now I'm going to turn this into an insert mesh shape, or an insert mesh brush. So make sure I have perspective off. I'm going to frame it in the middle of my scene here. I'm going to go to brush menu up here, and I'm going to do create insert mesh, and just do new on that. So now I have this as an insert mesh object. So now if I go back to my mesh here and frame this out, I could start drawing these out like so. It's great for inverted geometry. If you want to do normal map bake, this would work perfectly. But we're going to do something a little bit else. So the first thing I need to do is I'm going to come to my brush settings here, and I'm going to change the depth that's generated to a negative value. And this is going to allow me to draw that insert mesh shape out as a flush top to the surface. So right now it's generating where the bottom is the flush part of the surface, and I want to change it to the top. So I'm going to change this in depth value here to -16. And now when I draw it out, it should be flush with the surface you're drawing it onto. Now the next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use a function that has been in ZBrush since 4R4 called Mesh Fusion. And so what Mesh Fusion does is I can come through my model here, and I'm just going to make a new polygroup on this area here. So we're going to set polygroup, and we're going to group this out with that white area there, and I'm just going to give it a new polygroup like so. So what Mesh Fusion does, you make a polygroup on your model. After you have this polygroup made on your model, make sure you don't have any subdivisions. Since we're on dynamic subdivision mode, we don't have any subdivisions. Then you select an insert mesh brush that has a hole in it, right? So since we subtracted this model out from our original mesh, it has a hole on the back side. So it's not a watertight geometry. Now we can simply drag this out on our mesh like so, wherever we want it. And then if we hold Control and clear our mask, and then hold Control and do it again like you would a Dynamesh, ZBrush is going to take that polygroup and find the hole of it and then fuse it with that insert mesh object. So you can see it's fused that area together with that other object. So it's taken that insert mesh, and now the insert mesh is attached to that thing. So replace that polygroup with the insert mesh I just chose. So this is extremely handy when you make a bunch of things like this and you want to put them all over the place. So for that knife, for the handle where I had all those little holes, this is the process I used. Now by default, when you use this, it's going to smooth the outer edges of the border here. And this is controlled by this geometry SMT over here. So with SMT on, you're going to get this kind of effect. If I undo this and turn SMT off and now redo the process, you're now going to get something like this. So it's always going to generate an extra edge loop around the model here. So with the ZModeler brush, you can remove this pretty quick, like so. And now you can see I have that exact shape replicated right there, right? Simple. So this one I use all the time for just taking these different parts and doing things like this. So once again, that process is first come through and polygroup an area. So I'm going to do that, polygroup this, give it a new polygroup, draw your insert mesh out, that has that hole in it, like so. Clear your mask, redo it. You got a fuse, go back to your ZModeler brush, delete that edge loop, boom, done. So that's a good one. I like that one. All right, so now, since I'm running low on time, we're going to go to the next thing here. And this one is another way you can use existing.
Rob,
Yes.
you got 20 minutes, but I'm sure if you want to go over a little bit, I don't think they're going to complain.
Well, this one may take me 20 minutes.
Okay.
So we're going with this one.
Go
All
with
right.
this.
So here I have some drone parts, and these are all the individual parts. So this was the final engine turbine mare. So you saw most of the ways I generated the stuff. So inserting edge loops, doing the beveling, do the tapering, using that creasing with dynamic subdivisions to get things. This part right here is actually done using the QGrid option. So if I solo that here, so you can see the geometry is made very simple. I wasn't concerned about edge loops, wasn't concerned about anything. I just wanted that square box geometry, and then I wanted that square box geometry to have a nice bevel. So all this has had turned on was the dynamic subdivision with that QGrid option, and now it looks a ton times better than it would if it was left like this. So this is a perfect example of an area of a mesh to use QGrid on. Anything that has a lot of harsh edges, and it's just done, and now it looks like it matches everything else. So good example there of QGrid. Now for the drone, when I got to this stage, I had a few pieces modeled out. I knew kind of how I wanted the engines laid out, but I didn't know what I was going to do yet with the framing that went in between the drone here. So what I did with this was basically I just made my model like so, and then I appended in a plane object. So I'm going to come over here and I'm going to select a plane 3D object. And I'm going to go down the Initialize tab here, and I'm just going to change the alignment so I can see the plane here. And I'm going to turn that to a poly mesh. Now I'm going to go back to my drone here, and I'm just going to append that in. So I'm going to append in that plane 3D object. Now, as plane 3D objects come in a little bit small, so you can oftentimes you can increase the size of an object you bring in by unifying it. If your scene's already been unified, you can now come over to, say, the move option or the scale option and start scaling this out with the transpose. So I recommend you hitting the middle white circle there and then shift it to an axis on the side and then just scale up. You can repeat the scale by pressing 1 after you do it. So I'm pretty much just going to make a plane about that size. And then I'm going to move to the side and draw a transpose line out and just move it down a little bit. Now once I have this drawn out, what I did now was I went to the Geometry tab and I turned off SMT, and I'm just divide this up a little bit. So I'm going to divide it up to around 1,000,000 points. So with this at 1,000,000 points, I'm now select, say, the clay build-up brush here and get my draw size be a little bit bigger. Is I turned on transparency and symmetry, and I went through and I started using masking by holding control and starting drawing designs on what I wanted this to look like. So this is just coming in with simple masking, changing my brush size as needed, and just trying to figure out what kind of shapes I wanted this model to have. So I didn't know what my frame was going to look like, and so I could have started modeling it with, say, like the ZModeler brush and done it like that, but this way was a little bit more artistic, and I could come through and make a large array of changes pretty fast on the model. So just coming through and masking these different sections out. Now I didn't have any real idea of how I wanted this frame to be when I started making it, so this was definitely a process like creating this, but I ended up with something similar to this. And I could kind of see how it would look, when it was actually created at this level. Now, I have the cooking class version of this already done, so I have the masked version. So this is what I ended up with, right? So now that I ended up with this, what I wanted to do now is I was going to use the process of Z-remesher. So right now, this geometry here is just masked. So I can hit Control-W, and it would give me a new polygroup. I could go that route. Or I can come to the Geometry tab here and open up this edge loop area here. And in here you have an edge loop masked border. So this is going to look at the masking I just applied to this plane here. It's going to give me an edge loop around that masking, so it's going to smooth out any of those areas that might be harsh. And it's going to give me a new polygroup. So I'm going to come over here and just click that. And I first need to delete my lower subdivisions. And we'll get out of transparency here. And now, if I come into my model here, you can see now I have this nice polygroup with a nice smooth edge all the way around, right? So this is looking pretty good, right? So now I have this piece of geometry. Now I don't need the rest of the plane anymore, so I'm going to go to Modify Topology, and I'm going to do a delete hidden on that, and now I'm just left with this. Well, right now, as we showed earlier, this mesh right here is pretty dense, and we're still at like 80,000 points here. So it's too dense for me to really use the ZModeler brush on, but I want to get it to the level to use the ZModeler brush on. So what I'm going to use is ZRemesher. Now, ZRemesher has an option for keeping groups, and I use this all the time. If I had it still set up for a plane, it would make more sense, but I'm going to keep this on and turn my smooth groups border all the way down. I'm going to keep everything else at default, and I'm just going to click ZRemesh. Now, depending on how much geometry you have, this could take a little while, but it's usually pretty fast, and this is the first result the ZRemesher process got me. So it's came through and it's reduced the topology quite a bit. It's still pretty high, but it's gotten the shape and generated better result than I had when it was just that plane that was divided up, and then I just literally just converted it to that polygroup. So now it's at this level, it's still too high. So I'm going to come over here and change the ZRemesher option here to half and turn off adaptive, and now ZRemesh again. Now, I will keep doing this process until I get to a level of geometry that I think is a manageable level. So about this level here is pretty manageable. Right now, I can see the polygons throughout my entire surface, so I can start using the ZModeler brush now with those different options to start modifying this mesh. So I'm going to go back to the ZModeler brush here, and now I'm going to come through and I'm going to start manipulating this. So main manipulation point here is edge looping, so removing edge loops. So I can come through and start removing edge loops on these certain areas through here. I can add them back in if I want to add them back in. I can use that move infinite depth or normal depth there to get things where I want them. And just coming through and manipulating the geometry on your model here. Now, I know I wanted these things to be round at these ends here, so I'm going to remove some of these loops, and then I'm going to square out these edges as well. I'm going to come back in with that bridge connected polys to add those surfaces back to being round. So I don't really need this geometry here. And I'm just coming through and doing this process of removing loops and deleting topology. So another interesting way in which you can use additional processes that are already inside of ZBrush to your advantage with the ZModeler brush. So any of these areas can just be removed and clipped out through here. And this is the basic process I did for the entire drone here, for all the framing. And so I end up with something like this. Now, going back to the alignment option too, say I want some of these points aligned, right? So I can come through and mask out an area here, flip that, grab that clip curve brush again, draw this out, and align that like so. And you see now I'm going to get those aligned areas. So if there's any areas that look a little bit not straight enough, I can come through and align that. And you can do this pretty much for any part of your model. So I'll do a lot of this kind of aligning to get things straight along the surfaces there. And then also just moving to tailor the geometry on these meshes here. Slide's another one that works really well. It'll just slide across the edge, and this will allow you to keep you from going like left and right. It's going to slide across the edge that already exists. So I can come through and taper these guys back in a little bit, so it gives me a little bit cleaner edge looping geometry. Not as crazy. And we'll mask these guys out, clip this. We'll keep this harsh. And we'll keep this harsh too. Now you want to make sure when you're using clip that you're keeping track of your symmetry, if you have symmetry on or not, because if you start clipping stuff one way, it's going to affect the other side of your symmetry. But you can always bring it back with mirror and welding if needed. So now after I have this, I want to make sure these ends were straight. So I'm going to come through and mask these guys out quick and use that clip to clip that. And we'll do this up here. And I go, there we go. I'll make sure everything's mirror and welded. And now I'm going to go through and just add thickness to this really quick. Actually, I'm going to delete these edge loops. So using the QMesh action again, so hovering over poly, QMesh all polygons, add thickness. I can also inset this entire area here if I want this nice kind of border thing. So I'm going to go inset flat island. We're going to do inset region. And I come through and get this kind of inset region all the way through there. I actually want to make these little edge surfaces first. So back to the bridge, connected polys, align to normal, triangle sides, drag those out. Do them up here too. And one more time. So I use this little bridge option a bunch too. And that one, I should have typed it in and get enough resolution. I want that middle point. Now my tips here are a little bit off kilter, so they're not fully flush all the way through. So I'm going to go through and delete the back part of this model here. And another nice thing, once you have something created, you can always manipulate it further. So you can see I don't have a full flush there, so I'm going to use the clip brush again to make sure all that now is fully flush. Now if I come in and do that inset flat island, should get a nice inset all the way around through all those parts. And I come in now collapse or clean up any geometry I want cleaned up. So these edges here. And now this is a whole new poly group there. So we're going to first QMesh all polygons. And now I can come through and add different stuff. So that's the basic principle to use, the ZRemesher stuff with this. And as you can see, as I came through, this was my cleaned up version of it, right so. And then eventually it reached a stage where I had different areas carved out. So let's jump ahead a little bit here. I remember what I called this one. And then we should be ready for questions if there's any. All right, so here are all the different parts. Each of these parts were created with that same way. Yes, Paul?
You're down to about 10 minutes left.
Okay. I want to show one more thing, and then we can, then it's on your dime. All right, so another thing with the ZModeler brush, we talked about the clip brush, and also want to talk about slice. And slice is another option that you have inside of ZBrush that works really well with the ZModeler brush, especially for generating different effects or different surfaces. So here I have these arms, and these were all done that same way you just saw. So I made a masking thing on a plane, brought it out, used the ZRemesher to give me low geometry, started manipulating it, add QMesh to add thickness, and then I ended up with something like this. Now for these, you can come through now and say I want to add some areas in here with like holes. So if I went back to my, I don't know if I still have it loaded here, my original drone here, you can see I have these sort of areas, right? So I have these areas carved out, and if I just select this guy here, I'm getting these nice kind of frame type effects. So these frame effects were done just with the slice brush, and then just giving new polygroups to different areas, and then just using the ZModeler brush. So if I go back to my frame here, let's go back in scene, we're going to solo this part. So we're just going to come through and make some cuts. So I'm going to select the slice brush by hitting B on my keyboard, isolating by the letter S, and then the slice curve brush is I, so BSI. And now with this selected, I can come through and start slicing my model up. Now, every time you slice a model, it's going to give you a new polygroup. So I can come through and start slicing these different areas like so. And actually, I probably want to inset this quick, so let me just do that really quick here. Forgot a step. So auto groups is another one. When doing polygroups, it'll allow you to auto group different surfaces. We're going to QMesh, inset, polygroup all. There we go. That's what we're looking for. And then we're going to give this a little bit thickness on that island there. So polygroup island, QMesh that out. There we go. There we go. Now we can start doing our slices. So for the slice stuff, just make sure you have a slice brush selected, and I'm just going to come through and start slicing this up. Now if you hold shift, it's going to snap to angles, so you can come through and get a certain angle snap on this. And right now I'm not worried about the other side of the model here. I'm just focusing on one side here. I have mirror and weld ability, so I'm going to mirror and weld the other side back over. But as you can see here, you can just come through and slice this up. Make slices wherever you want them. You can see the B radius thing came up too. I could end up using B radius if I want. And so now I have this slice. You can see it's going to go through front and back pretty well, right? And I didn't insert this back one too well. But this may work. So if I insetted the other side like I was supposed to, this would have been a better result. But now you can come through and you can Q-mesh these by polygroup all, and you come through and just simply subtract out those different areas there. You want to make sure when using this too that if you don't have an object that's mirror and welded, that you have symmetry on or off, just to make sure that it matches on both sides. So I'm going to come through and just fix that quick. Now it should give me both. But now you can see you can come through and you can start generating frame stuff like that. So slicing up the model, which is generating new topology for you, and then you can use the Q-mesh actions or anything else to contribute that topology to your liking. So that is how the frame stuff was made for a lot of the framing there for the different parts. So just using that option there. Then all the other stuff for say like beveling and things like that were a lot of just the insert and multi-edge loops. So I can add, different bevel effects to say this edge here. I'm getting something like that now. So just playing with the different tools, creasing as well, running creasing on the model to see different things. And then if you find areas that are creased or not creased, just going back in and manipulating them with the crease option to just get those areas to affect how you want them to be. So that is it, Paul, for my showing stuff.
All right. So let me just answer a couple of questions that were popping up from people. I know everyone's asking if we're recording this and we're putting it up. We haven't decided yet on this. If we do, you'll want to keep an eye on our website. We'll most likely be, if we did do this, we'd probably put it up on our YouTube channel, which we started in the beginning of the meeting. So that's possible to where that go, but we have not decided yet. I just saw the clip brush. People were asking how he was using the clip brush. So he was masking off vertex points that he didn't want to clip, and then he was using the clip brush to straighten pieces.
Yeah, so here's an example. Here's a cylinder. I mask off this part of it, and then you can invert the mask, or I could have masked the other way by just simply clicking off, and then just select your clip brush, and then wherever this angle, where the shaded part is, it's going to clip to. So I can clip to like that. It's going to take all that geometry and mush it to that clip side.
All right, so there's how he was doing those pieces as far as using the clip brush to align edge vertex points. He also was doing, I know a lot of people are calling how to move multiple edges at one time or multiple vertex points at one time. You could do what he just did there as well and use the transpose line. Or, Trust, you want to move sliding edge loop and sliding edge real quick so they can see that. That's another way you guys could, in essence, move just two vertex points or multiple vertex points or even multiple edges.
Yeah, so in the options for your sliding and stuff, you have like edge loops complete. And so you can slide this, but this will also be affected by your masking. So I can come through and say mask part of it, and it's only going to slide up to that masked area.
Can you show also making the temporary polygroup and then copying that new polygroup and putting it in other places on the mesh?
Yes. So if you want to keep a polygroup where you want it, so let's say I come through and make this a polygroup. And I want to take this one, do another one over here. So to
by the way, he's hitting Alt key multiple times to keep switching through the polygrouping.
Yes.
Let me show that again.
So if you hit Alt, it'll switch through the colors. So I usually just select one that's more vibrant compared to the other one that's next to it. But now if you want to copy a polygroup, you can go over a poly with that polygroup option selected. And if you click and hold Shift, it's going to store that polygroup in there now. So now I can come back to any poly and click on it, and it's going to apply this polygroup to that area. And you can also use this with that alternate temporary polygroup, and now I can apply that polygroup there. So if I want this polygroup here, hover over a poly with that polygroup poly selected, hold Shift, and click, and it's going to grab it. And now wherever you paint, it's going to paint that polygroup. Or you can come through and use your temporary and fill it.
Can you show mirror and weld again really quick so they can see? So this question came up, if you forgot to have symmetry on or you're doing something with ZModeler, how do you get it to be on the other side of your mesh? He'll show you mirror and weld again.
Yeah, let's see if I'm on the right side here. Yeah, so mirror and weld will come across whichever axis, so you just need to know which side you're on. Sometimes you may have to come through here and mirror it to the other side before you do mirror and weld, because it's going to take one side and put on the other. So say I did something here and I totally forgot I didn't have, symmetry active, and so now it's not over here. So now you simply come up here to this mirror and weld and click it, and it's going to apply what was on that other side right on the other side there. So now you can see I have this on both sides of that surface.
I know the question also came up about KeyShot, so I'm going to...
Yes, I need to do that. So I totally just forgot it, but I'm going to do that quick.
Okay. Well, Todd, why are you pulling that stuff up for purchasing? Everyone's asking how does it work? So there are now 2 versions of the KeyShot edition for ZBrush, and so you got to pay $550. That'll give you KeyShot Pro with the bridge, and you would either purchase for $350 KeyShot HD with bridge. So if you already own KeyShot, so if you already have, say, KeyShot Pro or HD or one of the other licenses, you don't have the special edition one that was made specifically for our user base, then all you need to do is purchase just the bridge for $150. Okay, so that's how the purchasing of the KeyShots go. Okay, if you're going to use the special edition KeyShot that was made specifically for the user base, you have to purchase the bridge with it. And only that version can you open and close files. So someone has the full $2,000 version of KeyShot Pro, they can't give you a file and put it in the one that Joseph's in right now, the special edition KeyShot. The special edition KeyShot can only open its own type of file, and you cannot import anything into this one. You would have to use ZBrush in essence as your importer. Go ahead, Joss.
Yeah, so short on time, but basically I took the model that we had here that was all done with the ZModeler brush. I came to the render option up here. I activated KeyShot. And then now when you click BPR, and if you have the ZBrush KeyShot Bridge installed and KeyShot for ZBrush installed, when you click this button, it's going to take all your model here. And since it was all dynamic, it's going to convert it to geometry, true geometry, and then send it right to KeyShot. So this is the model right in KeyShot, and it just sent while Paul was talking. Now, I have some materials already here, so I'm just going to show you the breakdowns of the materials here. So basically, I can just come through now and apply materials across my mesh here. So I have these broken out into subtools for the one I sent. So I came through and actually figured out which pieces I want different materials, and I grouped them together in the subtools. So instead of having that 62 subtools, I condensed all my parts inside of ZBrush here down to 17. And so now I have this entire model down to those 17 parts. And with this, with the bridge, as it's active, I can come through and now start manipulating, anything inside of here and get a different look and feel or different style. And then if I want to change something, I can go back to ZBrush and say I want to make this, airframe to be up high like so. Now I can send it back by just simply clicking BPR. And it's going to go right back to KeyShot. And you're going to see that change be affected. So this allows you to just come back and forth and play with your design a little bit while you still have this up and have this constantly rendering inside of KeyShot here. Now, if you're using a lot of the KeyShot Bridge, I also recommend, changing your CPU usage here, because in general with the, Paul, I'm going to mute you for a second. In general with the KeyShot being a CPU-related program and also ZBrush being CPU-related, it uses a lot of cores. They both love cores, and so they're going to try to use as much as possible as available on your machine. So if you have both of these guys up, you may want to just tailor KeyShot's usage down a little bit so it doesn't eat all your performance away from ZBrush while you're using it. But that's the main process there. It's really pretty simple. You activate this by clicking this button, and then you simply send. And whatever you send and whatever you see inside of ZBrush is going to get sent to KeyShot. And then from in here, you can modify the materials, put different aspects on different parts, and just get the look and the feel you're kind of looking for on your models. So that's it. One question we get a lot of, too, in general, is we get often asked, where can we find the back plates that we've shown. And these are done through the installer. There's a KeyShot content installer. And so these are some of the back plates that people often have questions about. And these are all installed through this ZBrush to KeyShot content installer. So you should have got a link for this when you got the bridge. And in here you have a bunch of back plates. You also have a bunch of ZBrush specific environments. So HDR images, and you can load those into KeyShot and use them. There's also a few materials that have came out, and these are the ones that are kind of based around clay. So you can come through and apply, different effects of like clay-looking materials to your models. So if I want to make this whole thing entirely clay now, I can go over and just click that. Now I have the clay version of the drone, and if I position it somewhat like it looks like it's on this base here, there you go. All right, Paul.
Yeah, again, those guys, that content gets shipped when you purchase the special edition KeyShot. There's another link to download this content, and we put together these HDRI pummel. Taken a lot of these HDRI cells and built them, so there's stuff around Hollywood, stuff around France, and then Joseph did these back plates, and then we created all these clay-looking materials. So that only gets shipped when you purchase a special edition KeyShot, either the HD or the Pro. And when you purchase it in the email, there'll be a link to download this content so you can have it installed in your KeyShot at home. Yeah, anything will go to KeyShot. So fiber mesh will automatically go to KeyShot. All the dynamic subdiv, you don't actually have to apply it. It'll go to KeyShot. Even if surface noise is not applied, it'll go to KeyShot. Z-spheres will go to KeyShot. All ZBrush materials will go to KeyShot. Anything you see in ZBrush, that gets sent to KeyShot. So that's the advantage of going with the special edition with the bridge, or just going with the bridge. All that stuff gets sent over for you. For upgrading, obviously KeyShot's on our product, so we don't have any control of upgrading. So with the last one, there was a fee for upgrading, but it was very minimal. It wasn't very expensive. Upgrading from HD to Pro is also not expensive to do. For the past one, it was only $200 to go from the Special Edition HD to the KeyShot Special Edition Pro. And as far as ZBrush is considered, I saw the question, yes, we have given free upgrades for the life of the product. We have never charged for an upgrade. It's the now going on, we do the math, 17 years that ZBrush has been around. We have never charged for an upgrade. Obviously, I can't say forever when and if that's going to end, but right now we're not charging for upgrades. So to answer that question, there is an education version of KeyShot. You rent it in essence. It's $100 for 365 days. So if you're a student, you're in school for at least 2 years, you're better off just getting at least the KeyShot HD version because you're going to be about the same price as being a student. And then when you graduate, you still have KeyShot. So if I was a student, I would probably recommend that, especially if you're going to be in school for like 3, 4, 2 years. As far as the webinar being posted, we'll look into that and see. As far as the webinar is continuing, actually, when we end here, there's going to be a poll that opens up. If you guys can just answer those, it's 5 questions, and obviously one of them being, would you like to continue seeing these webinars from us? If you can answer that, that'd be a great help for us so we can get the whole group of you all at once getting that information and finding out what we continue doing with these webinars. Because Joseph and I definitely have more ideas that we want to do with webinars if we do continue this. All right, so that's also where you can also leave the feedback, John. So when we shut down here, on your guys' computer screen, a little survey will actually pop up automatically, and it's going to have 5 questions there, and there's also be a space for you guys to leave feedback. If you guys can answer those, it'd be a huge help for us. Continue looking at, again, if we want to continue doing these webinars, and number 2, continuing to push the element with the webinars and give you guys as much information as we can in this hour and a half that we have with you. Unfortunately, we can't talk about any future development, though, with anything within the webinars or anything like that. So I know a bunch of questions came up with that. Okay, I think that does. Did I miss any questions? Russ, do you have any closing remarks that you want to do? He's using the bridge right now, Edge.
Yeah, I was going to make a quick zip tie, but I ran out of time.
Do you want to just quickly talk about what you just did right there so they know what you just did right there?
Yeah. So, go back. Let me find it again. So, if you put 2 holes in your mesh, basically, so I had this quick cube here, and I just came through and I deleted polygons here, and then I added an insert single loop here and deleted polygons here. So I have 2 holes. And now if I hover over one of these edges, and there's a bridge option, and then you have the option for 2 holes. And so I can select a first hole, and then when I select the second hole, it's going to allow me to start generating this bridge effect across the model here. So for the drone, if I come back to this guy here, let's see if we can find my little zip ties quick. Where'd you go, zip tie? There you go. These are all done that same way. So just really quickly using the bridge, making that connection with that ZModeler bridge option to generate the zip tie length. And then I turn these into insert mesh objects and placed them around my wiring here on the model. And that's what it ended up looking like. Now the wiring here also has UVs on it, so that's why you're seeing this kind of sparse stuff on it. So I sent that one to KeyShot with UVs. So that I could use the UV mapping on that area to generate a carbon fiber wrap. That's it. That's all I got, Paul.
All right. Well, by the way, since that reminds me of a question that came up, when you guys are using the ZModeler brush, I wouldn't have UVs on your meshes because we're not creating UVs as you guys keep adding edge loops and new meshing and things like that. So I would have UVs on the mesh when you're actually using it.
Yeah, the end result, like once you have your model done, is the time to do them. Yep.
Yeah. All right, thank you so much. Again, please, if you have the time, please, the 5 questions that are asked when this ends, we greatly appreciate you taking the time to answer that because it'll help us continuing seeing about doing these webinars if we're going to upload it and so forth and so on. So thank you so much from everyone around the world. We have people from everywhere. It was really awesome seeing people from so many different countries, China, Belgium, France, Germany, England, a lot of Canadians. Thanks for coming out, people. Yeah, got to have my fellow Canadians. Maple Leafs, eh? Out. So, ironically, I don't know how many Americans we had. It seems like we just had a lot of people from many, 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 many different countries, Brazil, Mexico. So really awesome for all of you to join us. I know it's later for you in Europe right now. New Zealand, too. Awesome. Wow. So thanks so much. Please keep an eye on our website. If we continue to do these, we will obviously be making announcements on our Facebook, our Twitter, our normal social media, as well as ZBrush Central. So, and I put in here, but it looks like you guys are all responding right now, so you might not see it. I'm not sure or not. If you do have other questions or something else that you missed that you need to ask us, please feel free to email us at webinars, that's plural with an S, at pixellogic.com. Again, that's webinars at pixellogic.com. All right. Thank you so much for coming. Hopefully we'll see you guys again. And keep posting that work on ZBrush Central. We love seeing the stuff that's being done on there. We're on there every day, all the time, looking at what you guys are doing with the application. Really, really awesome stuff. All right, thank you. Do you have anything else?
Nope, I'm good. Thank you all.
Good. All right, guys, have a wonderful week. Have a great weekend, and happy ZBrushing. We'll see you online.